And, this is a treat. I get to reintroduce from yesterday the wonderful Dunkin and equally wonderful Kate Brandt, who I did meet at the Department of Energy when she was in the Office of Science. And it's just amazing because I don't really think I can do anything other than say, take it away, ladies, because Kate, Chief Sustainability Officer at Google, former Federal Chief Sustainability Officer, Dunkin, Chief Information Officer, United States Department of Energy. They know how to have this conversation, but I couldn't do it justice just reading bios, which is what I don't do. But know this, Kate has this incredible optic now globally. I am a fan. I do follow you, Kate. And to have known you, understanding what it's like to work in the Forrestal building at the White House, having that expanse and now taking it outward, it's truly amazing. And thank you for your service in that regard. And I'm sure you're going to reference a few wonderful things that you're doing with the commercial sector. And folks, you heard about Ann and you heard Ann, and she is a former CIO at another agency, but the environment I know is very personal and important to her. And I have to give a shout out. I'm a big fan of the concepts of smart cities. Ann has another equally global optic of this, not just in our country, but externally. And having worked and rolled up her sleeves, she understands technology's impact on the environment. So without further ado, ladies, take it away. The floor is yours. Have a great conversation.
So thank you, Pete, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to turn the tables a little bit and be the interviewer today. I'm really thrilled to be here with Kate, and I'm going to just share a little bit of Kate's bio. I will not do to her what I hate when people do to me and read that whole long bio, but I want to highlight a couple things about Kate's bio. Not only is she currently this leading sustainability efforts at Google, she was the United States' first federal chief sustainability officer, which is just, being the first of anything means you're going to define that role and really break ground in terms of how that role works. And so we have Kate to thank for setting that playing field. Kate also held several other senior roles in the government. Pete mentioned DOE. I want to highlight that she was also the Director of Energy and Environment in the Office of Presidential Personnel, because that's my opportunity to tell you a little bit about how Kate and I met. Kate, I blame and thank Kate for my joining the federal government. And I still distinctly recall when she was in the Office of Presidential Personnel and I was talking to EPA, her telling me that Senate confirmation would be no big deal.
Oh, no. False advertising, you're right.
Well, it probably was no big deal when you told me that, but the landscape changed. So Kate, thank you for being here today. I'm really glad to talk to you again. And I'm going to jump right in and ask you some questions, okay?
Wonderful. So great to be with you, Ann. It's such a pleasure to see you and looking forward to our conversation here.
Yeah, great to see you too. So as you know, the federal government has one of the largest digital and physical footprints of any organization in the world. Every time we try and navigate it, we understand just how big it is, right? It's growing every year. How can the federal government help pave the way for a net zero economy by leading by example in its operations?
Yes. Well, what a great place for us to start. And as you've noted, as the former federal chief sustainability officer, I truly know firsthand that, of course, the U.S. federal government, but also governments around the world, I think, are really increasingly focused on the public sector's role in driving sustainability and leading by example. And this takes a lot of forms, right? It's about energy consumption, it's about vehicle fleets, it's about procurement decisions, and it's about culture change. And I think we all appreciate, this is truly an all hands on deck moment for our planet that we're living through. We've probably all seen the latest UN report on Monday, the IPCC report, which just again underscores the urgency of action. And so I think corporations and governments need to take the lead. And so I have been thrilled to see, President Biden has encouraged the federal government to continue leading on sustainability, this transition to a net zero economy, and that there are ambitious goals that have been put on the board through executive order for clean energy supply, zero emission vehicles, net zero emission buildings, climate resilient infrastructure, and of course, much more. And obviously want to give a big shout out to Andrew Mayock, who is our current federal chief sustainability officer. His leadership has been tremendous. And I know there's a huge federal family that's come together around setting these goals and now working to achieve them. And I will also say, in particular, I was very excited to see the administration's focus on the adoption of 24/7 carbon-free energy. You know, this aligns with something that we are very passionate about at Google, which is carbon-free energy supply for our operations. And, you know, like the federal government at Google, we have been working on sustainability for a long time. In fact, I would say it's really been something we've been thinking about since our inception. And this goes, you know, all the way back to commitments we made like in 2007 to be a carbon neutral company, or 2010 when we started purchasing renewable energy at scale, and then in 2017 matching 100% of our electricity with renewables for the first year, and we've been doing that ever since. Now we're at about 6 gigawatts of new renewable energy that we have procured, which makes us the largest annual corporate purchaser of renewables. So just to share a little bit more about how we're thinking about this at Google, again, looking at this as a crucial decade for action. We think about this as our third decade of climate action. And so, you know, you asked about net zero, that being the North Star, I think for so many of us, that is our objective at Google, is to have net zero emissions across our operations and value chain by 2030. And a key piece of that is 24/7 carbon-free energy. And I was mentioning, so thrilled to see that as the North Star for the federal government as well. We have been hard at work on that journey, and I'll share a little bit more about that later. But also, as part of our longstanding commitment to sustainability, we're really proud that we operate the cleanest cloud in industry with the smartest, most efficient data centers. And so for our customers, this means that moving to the Google Cloud can dramatically improve a business or an agency's carbon footprint. And this is another area where I think the federal government can really lead by example. It's, you know, by embracing not only the technological advantage of cloud computing, but also the sustainability benefits. And, you know, if we look across the sector, 90% of companies have or are planning to implement sustainability targets, and 85% of CIOs now say sustainability is an IT priority or a performance metric, which is stunning. And I don't think that was the case even a few years ago. So organizations are increasingly moving to the cloud. They're expecting clean energy to be, you know, a piece of that commitment. And so, again, I think this is a huge opportunity for the federal government to lead, and really excited to see the commitment that's already there.
That's awesome. And you know, I think that it's so important that we make sure that people understand that they're getting that moving to the cloud doesn't absolve them of responsibility for sustainability, and that cloud providers are committed to delivering a clean environment in the cloud. Do you have any advice before we move on to sort of our next topic for the government as we try and evaluate the cloud, and you know, what kind of questions we should be asking our vendors to find out, you know, is this a more sustainable cloud or a less sustainable cloud we're moving into?
Yeah, so I think, you know, as you're highlighting, and as I was mentioning a moment ago, shifting to hyperscale data centers has brought tremendous energy efficiency benefits with it. You know, a typical hyperscale facility is somewhere between, I think, 1.4x to 2x more efficient than going with on-prem compute facilities. And this is, of course, because they're larger, they can be custom designed for energy efficiency, and just allowing for more computing with much less energy consumption. So at a sector level, you know, this has delivered very significant gains. Recent research that I was just catching up on as I was preparing for our conversation today, I saw finds that the shift away from smaller traditional data centers, which is about 79% of compute instances back in 2010, that has gone towards hyperscale facilities like the ones that we operate at Google. And now 89% of compute instances are happening in those facilities. So this has been a huge sea change. It's allowed for the total electricity consumption from the data center sector to stay essentially flat over the last decade, while compute has grown by 650%. And I mean, that is just staggering to hear, that in a decade where we've had this huge growth of compute, that we're seeing energy use staying flat. I think that is just a testament to the focus of the industry. I know many people on this call probably have played a role in that, but I think that is such an important stat to underscore. And so, of course, by moving an application from a self-managed data center or a collaboration facility into a cloud, be that a Google Cloud, another cloud, you know, that's going to come with benefits. And then I think to your question, Anne, of, you know, what else do we want to see? We think you should also be seeing that's a cloud that's, committed to 100% renewable energy match, and then, over time, 24/7 carbon-free energy. And I said, that's our commitment at Google. We want to get there by 2030, and we know the federal government is working on the same. And so, we're able to do this at Google because we're laser focused on energy efficiency. As I said, this has been a major theme for the industry over the last decade. And just to share a little bit more about how we're thinking about energy efficiency in the data center at Google, first, it's all about, right, the megawatt. It's about using less electricity. And for us, that's been, we're able to be about 2 times more energy efficient than a typical data center. But we also have, utilized some really interesting technologies. For example, we've looked at machine learning. Our team has applied what we think of as an AI-powered efficiency recommendation system to the cooling in the data center, which, as you all know, is where a lot of the energy gets used, is to cool the machines. And through using that machine learning, we've been able to see an additional 30% increase in efficiency. And that's, of course, in a data center that we've already been laser focused on energy efficiency within. Some of the other technologies that we've been looking at are TensorFlow processing units, outfitting data centers with high performance servers, deploying smart temperature controls, lighting, cooling controls. So these are all important aspects as well to be thinking about when we're thinking about what does a highly efficient data center look like. And then just to talk a little bit more about 24/7, because I know this is a shared goal of Google, of other companies like Microsoft, and of course of the federal government. The way that we're thinking about this is the future of the grid needs to be around the clock clean energy supply for data centers, for offices, for everyone. And so, at Google, we're focused on working with partners to realize this future. And we think there's a few key components to that. The first is purchasing more clean energy and creating innovative transaction structures. And so we've come together with organizations like SEBA, the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance. We're also working with UN Energy on a coalition called SE for All. That's a coalition of companies and governments at the city and the federal level on how do we come together around driving more transactions around 24/7. Also developing commercialization of new technologies. Getting to 24/7 is going to require more solar, more wind, but also other technologies like always on baseload clean energy solutions like geothermal. And then lastly, again, it's partnerships, it's policy, it's all of us coming together around how do we drive a 24/7 grid of the future. Just a couple other things I wanted to mention that I think are really interesting that are happening in this space is how do we make the electricity that's powering the data centers, how do we actually shift compute based on where the grid is cleaner? And so we've been doing work on this that we call the Carbon Intelligent Computing Platform, where we're now able to actually shift non-essential compute jobs in both time and space to really take advantage of where is the grid cleaner at a given time, if the sun is shining, if the wind is blowing. We think this is another really important step for data center operators to be thinking about, again, as we try to look towards this 24/7 future.
Yeah, so we're not nearly as sophisticated about that at DOE. We do some time shifting with our supercomputers.
That's great.
Where we can, right? But we don't have the flexibility and the scale of a Google to do that. But that is a great example of where you're able to really make a difference in ways that seem obvious but aren't, right? We think of once you do them we think they're obvious, but they're not necessarily obvious. So let's move along from energy, because of course there are lots of other environmental areas. Go back to my EPA days and let's talk about other areas, waste and water. So how is the data center sector addressing other environmental impacts like water and waste to be more sustainable?
Yes, no, I'm so glad we're speaking about that too, because obviously energy efficiency, 24/7 carbon-free energy is essential, but you're right, there's other impacts the data centers have as well that we need to be very thoughtful about. And so I think, first, eliminating physical waste is an essential component of any ICT sector strategy to operate, sustainably. And I think it all comes back to the circular economy, which is a topic that I've been particularly passionate about for a long time now, which is, how do we design out waste? How do we keep products and materials in use for longer? And there's really, really great opportunities to do this with data center infrastructure and applying these circular economy principles. So this is something at Google we've been thinking about for a very long time, even before I think someone would have called it circular economy. And this is everything from, using component parts from old machines to do repairs and upgrades. This is also remanufacturing. We have for a very long time done a lot of remanufacturing of our machines where we can pull them off the floor. We can, provide some key upgrades without actually having to replace a full machine. And then we've also done a lot of work around secondary market sales. This is a great opportunity for a lot of hyperscale data center operators where obviously we have a high bar for the technology that we need to have and it's evolving quickly, but there's often opportunities to, wipe drives clean to ensure other products are ready for reuse by someone else and then sell those on secondary markets. And we've done that with millions and millions of units over the years. And that's again where we see a really great nexus between what's a sustainable solution, but there's also a great business case behind that because you can get more value out of those products out of those components as you sell them. And then of course, recycling. I think we're all very aware that this is critical, right? E-waste is a key issue that we all need to be very focused around. And so doing recycling of any components that can't be resold, that can't be reused, and doing that really responsibly. So, I know that this is a consideration for many of us, but I really think it's important for data center operators, for users of cloud, to be thinking about what is that opportunity to reuse, to utilize those circular economy principles. And again, I think there's a strong business case behind doing that. So another resource, of course, that should be top of mind for anyone in the data center space is water. This is something at Google, since we started building, our first data center back in 2007, that we've been focused on. And so like with energy, I think it starts with efficiency measures. It's about how do we reuse water? How do we get more cycles out of that water that we are using? But also, I think, with climate, with growing droughts around the world, with growing pressure on our ecosystems, the urgency of water challenges, I think, is increasing in many parts of the world. And so we have thought a lot at Google about how do we continue to keep pace with that. And so last year, we took the step of setting a goal to replenish 120% of the water that we consume on average across all of our data centers and actually our offices too. And so for us, this means we want to be partnering with communities, with other data center operators, with other companies in watersheds that are water users to invest in water stewardship projects to ensure that we are keeping our watersheds healthy and also thinking about the human health dimension as well. So we are looking at projects that are ranging from how do we get cleaner water in communities to how do we plant more trees to do better groundwater recharge and many others. So this is an area where I think it's really important for both data center operators and then consumers of data center products to be really thinking about water and what we want to be asking of our vendors as it relates to water. And so I think it's these water replenishment solutions, it's community investments, which create local jobs. And then again, I think it's also continuing to really focus on innovation. How do we drive new technologies that enable us to use water and cycle it more frequently, utilizing gray water solutions? So I think this is, again, just another space that's really important for us to be working on together as a community.
And that's great. And of course, you have firsthand knowledge with the 22-year drought on the West Coast right now.
Yes.
So it's very clear and obvious to you and everybody at Google that there's a problem that we need to solve here. And it's good to hear that you're working on that with the communities in California and other locations.
No, you're right, Anne. I know as you know, I know you spent a lot of time in California, and of course I have as well. And you're right. I mean, just seeing the droughts that we faced as a state is an example of what so many communities are facing around the world. So I couldn't agree more. I think as a California headquartered company, for me personally as a native Californian, we have to really keep a focus on this issue.
Absolutely. So pivoting just a little bit, in addition to greening IT, what about the greening by IT? What are the opportunities for cloud computing technology to drive emission reductions in organizations' operations, or help them adapt to climate change?
Absolutely. And I know I love the way that you framed this question. This is how we talk about it all the time. I think there's a lot of what we've been talking about earlier in the discussion is the greening of IT. How do we operate sustainable data centers that are energy efficient, water efficient, taking into account circular economy principles, driving towards 24/7. But also there is so much opportunity for IT to provide solutions, right? There are so many solutions through cloud computing, through geomapping, through other platforms that can have tremendous benefits, both in driving emissions reductions, but also to your point, as we're adapting to the impacts of climate change. So this is something we've been thinking about a lot at Google with our partners because we see so much potential here. And frankly, there is so much demand. I have to say, literally not a day goes by that we're not hearing from I don't even want to say one, but like multiple cloud customers that are coming to us saying, hey, we need solutions. If that, be that in a supply chain, in scheduling to drive greater energy efficiency, in solving so many different areas. So I think this is just a space where we're just beginning to scratch the surface, and I'd imagine that others are feeling the same. But I did want to share a few examples of places where I think we've been really able to build some great partnerships. So I mentioned a little bit about geospatial insights. This is critical, whether we're thinking about how to reduce emissions or from an adaptation perspective. And so one company that approached us several years ago, I literally can still remember the meeting where we started this conversation with my peer at Unilever, Rebecca Marmont. Unilever has a big commitment to ensuring that their palm oil is harvested sustainably. And so we have a tool at Google that some people may be familiar with. It's called Earth Engine. It's this tremendous geospatial platform where we have Landsat data from 37 years embedded in this platform. And you can literally see change on the Earth's surface over all of that time period. And there's tremendous deep data and insights built into this platform. And so in this instance, our Earth Engine team and our cloud team partnered up with Unilever to help them gain greater accountability into their palm supply chain and better detect deforestation and then prioritize areas of forests or habitats that were really in need of urgent protection. So this was, I think, a really nice example of the power of bringing together, compute, geomapping, and then a very motivated company that said, hey, we want to be reducing our impact on the environment. We need better data and insights. And so being able to give them those real-time insights into where palm might create deforestation issues so then they can take more urgent action. This is a very powerful example that we really want to be building upon. Another one I would highlight is building on the expertise of optimizing routes. We have Google Maps at Google. We know a lot about optimizing routes, and then combining this with machine learning. I talked a little bit about machine learning for optimizing cooling in a data center. Also really exciting applications of machine learning for how companies do routing. And so customers can reduce transportation and logistics emissions through getting better insights. And so we did this with UPS. They were able to reduce gasoline consumption by about 10 million gallons per year by optimizing their routing, utilizing Google Maps, using machine learning, and using that power of big compute. So another really good example that, again, I think there would be lots of applications for other organizations that are doing large scale logistics. But it's not just private sector companies that we've had the chance to team up with. Also, we've done some great work with some federal agencies. So I would note we're working with the U.S. Forest Service right now to help them manage forests more responsibly with detailed information about land cover change. This is a big topic for the Forest Service, sort of similar to the Unilever example around palm and deforestation. We want to bring the Forest Service better insights about how land change is happening over time. So that's been a really exciting partnership. And then, of course, near and dear, I know, to your heart and DOE, of course, we have a great partnership with you all. And I particularly would note the work that we're doing with Los Alamos National Labs with LANL, where we're using analytic tools running in the Google Cloud to help accelerate the identification and development of geothermal resources. And this being, I think, such an exciting project because, as I mentioned, that always on base load carbon-free power of geothermal, I think, is critical to the 24/7 grid of the future. So I particularly love this partnership that we have with LANL. And then the last one I would highlight is with NOAA. We are partnering with NOAA in building AI and ML to improve the quality of weather forecasting and to enhance their use of satellite and environmental data for monitoring for weather forecasting, for climate research, for technical innovation. So this is a very deep partnership. And again, back on this theme of the power of big compute and machine learning to really unlock data and insights, also utilizing geomapping. This NOAA partnership has been a longstanding one, and I think is a really powerful example. So those are just a few that I would highlight on this great theme of the greening through IT or by IT.
Yeah, that's, those are great examples. And I've got to tell you that one of the amazing things from my time at EPA and starting to see at DOE as I get out to the sites is the incredible ability of computing to solve really hard climate and environmental problems, right? We're using compute to help us understand environmental justice and energy justice, climate change, weather patterns. So amazing, amazing opportunities. So we are just about out of time. I'm going to throw you one last really quick question, and that is, if you were a federal CIO, or if you want to give advice to a federal CIO, what is the one thing or the next thing maybe you would tell them to do to make efficient, effective, and environmentally friendly use of the cloud?
Yes. Oh, I love that question. Well, I think yes. First and foremost, it is utilizing the cloud. As we talked about earlier in the conversation, the cloud brings with it huge sustainability benefits. But then I think it's also being choosy about what kind of cloud you're using. So we've talked about the importance of cloud operators that are focused on energy efficiency, that are focused on 100% renewable energy today, 24/7 carbon-free energy in the future, and looking at some of these other key resource issues on circular economy, on responsible use of resources, and on water efficiency. So I think focusing on that suite of issues, seeing those as key for any cloud provider you're going to partner with is essential. And then I think too, looking at what we were just talking about at the end of our conversation, those greening through IT opportunities. What are those ways that cloud compute can be teamed up with other technology solutions, be that machine learning, geospatial, other, to solve hard challenges? So that's my advice.
All right. Kate, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you again and to see you. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much, Anne, and a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you, everybody.